Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select...
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got a great weekend of college football championship games to get to here on the show. But first, we're going to start things off with the Eagles' Director of College Scouting, Alan Wolking, to talk about the edge rushing position and how do you scout those guys, project them from college to the NFL. Really fun discussion there with Alan to start things off on the show. After that, we're going to transition to Saturday Scouting, where Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler are going to join me. We're going to get through what we saw this weekend in college football, a bunch of great games to get to. Conference championships decided, and also we've got some more Senior Bowl news. We'll get into all that there in Scout Stories. After that, we've got On the Clock, where Chris McPherson returns to the show. We're going to debate who has helped their stock the most in college football this season as we get ready for next year's NFL Draft. We'll get on that at the end of the show. We'll wrap it up with Draft Mailbag, where we've got two questions to get to on the back end of the show. As always, make sure you go on to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a review. If you've got a question, a mock draft, position rankings, whatever it is, you can throw it over on our Apple Podcast page. We will break it all down. And as always, make sure you are subscribed to the show. Get the show sent to your podcast device twice weekly, every week, up through the NFL Draft next spring. That said, let's get things rolling. Excited to catch up with Alan Wolking here for Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
All right, well, let's get going here with Scout Stories as I welcome in the Eagles Director of College Scouting, Alan Wolking, to talk through pass rushers. On the outside, we call them edge rushers, depending on the team that Scout works with here with the Eagles. This is a defensive end. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Thanks for having me, friend.
So let's talk through pass rushers. It's obviously a really high-profile position. Everybody's looking for ways to be able to get after the quarterback. What is the toughest part about projecting those guys from college to the NFL?
Yeah, from college, I think probably alignment and usage can be tricky. How his college team is using him. And then translating how a guy wins in college versus how he's going to win in the NFL versus NFL caliber blockers. I think a good recent example might be the Miami rushers from this draft. Rousseau moved around. There's production inside. Where you saw Phillips, he kind of won in more traditional ways with a more immediately applicable rush variety. So I think it's taking those things into account and trying to figure out, how that kind of projects to our league.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting too because you're seeing those guys, for the upperclassmen, you're seeing them at all-star games and trying to get a sense of like, all right, well, this guy won inside, he won outside, but the ways that he won in college, are those going to be able to translate to the NFL?
That's right. And who he's winning against, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure. So let's get to the next part here. And I think that this is a big one for our listeners, is trying to separate what makes a solid rusher different from a good rusher, or a good rusher from a great rusher. What are some of those differentiating factors for you in your mind at that position?
Yeah, I think as we talk through some positions, instincts are going to be a common theme across the board. For edge rushers specifically, length, power, and bend are critical. Guys who can create vertical pressure and guys who can change edges while they're gaining ground. I tend to like guys who can win with power. If a rusher can take your midline and go directly through the blocker, he's typically going to impact the pocket more consistently. It's the shortest path to the quarterback. Brandon Graham is a good example of a torqued up rusher who can overwhelm blockers with power, just get underneath them and really impact the pocket. So I think that's kind of what the differentiator is for the really good ones.
We've talked about that a little bit on this podcast over the course of the last year, 2 years, is when you try and separate power rushers from speed rushers. Obviously you have combo guys that can win in multiple ways, but especially in today's game with bubble screens, RPOs, all the ways the ball gets out of the quarterback's hand fast, you want to get from A to B as fast as possible. And like you said, that the fastest way to that is a straight line right to the offensive tackle.
Absolutely. And it's great to have speed, but if you have speed and you can't convert to power, the offense can typically find answers for you. At least that's my opinion.
Is there a piece of advice that you've gotten from whether it's a fellow scout, whether it's been from a boss, whether it's been from a defensive line coach, when it comes to evaluating this position that has stuck with you most over your career?
We have such a good group of scouts and coaches. I think on our staff, Jeremiah Washburn has been a great resource. He's super knowledgeable and he can speak both languages on the coaching side and personnel side. In our scouting group, Jim Ward is a guy on our staff who's got a great eye for line play. He's got a really developed understanding for leverage points and how guys win. What I mentioned before about gaining ground and changing edges is something that Jim emphasizes. And I think as you watch good rushers inside and out, how they move their feet through contact and their ability to create vertical pressure, that's something Jim's always emphasized that's kind of rubbed off on me. But we have a great staff when it comes to that. And we have a lot of conversation amongst the group.
What is it that looks like when you're talking about like changing edges for a guy at that position? What exactly would that look like on film?
Yeah, so essentially it's if you can get a guy moving backwards and you're on one shoulder and you're trying to get to the other, a lot of times guys will move laterally across the blocking surface, but they're doing it while without gaining ground vertically. So if you see a guy continuing to press the blocker back and he slides across face and the feet never stop, you don't see these lateral steps, you see vertical steps. So while they're continuing their path, crushing the pocket, they're able to move from, let's say, inside shoulder to outside shoulder. That's so difficult to defend. It's very difficult to do too. You look at a guy like Fletcher Cox. He's maybe one of the few guys who can do it. Chris Jones does it well. There are a few guys I think that you can watch the tape and you'll see a few examples each game, but it's very difficult to do.
So I guess for the viewers, it's like your hands and feet are working together simultaneously, independently from each other. So you're still gaining ground while still trying to win at the top of the rush with your hands.
Absolutely. The coordinated rushers like that, when it all kind of works in sync, those are good pictures.
Alan, this has been awesome, man. Thanks so much for shedding light on the pass rushers for us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.
Well, great stuff there from Alan. And to me, some of the big takeaways was it's very similar to what Ian Cunningham said last week, talking about the defensive tackle position and how it's the big thing with defensive linemen is understanding what they're asked to do, the roles that they play within their scheme, and all the variety you see at the college level. So I thought that carryover from defensive tackle to edge rusher, I thought that was notable. Also, the separating factors, talking about that combination of length, power, and bend, and even kind of looking at Brandon Graham and those kind of power rushers who can rush the midline and be able to push the pocket, get from A to B as fast as possible. I thought that was notable there from Allen. And then also to him just kind of throwing a little bit of a bouquet there for Jeremiah Washburn and Jim Ward on this scouting staff and the impact that they've had on him, and looking at the ability to change edges as a pass rusher and what that means, what that looks like. I thought Alan really painted a really good picture there in your mind. I hope you guys all took the same notes that I did coming out of that conversation. That said, let's transition into now what we saw this week in college football. We're going to start things off with Saturday Scouting. Hey, Eagles fans, get ready for the game each Sunday with an exclusive look at Eagles pregame warm-ups brought to you live each week when you join myself, Amy Campbell, and Eagles insider Dave Spadaro on the Kickoff Show presented by Exalta. We provide Eagles-focused analysis, late-breaking news, and the team perspective that you cannot get anywhere else. The Kickoff Show presented by Exalta can be seen live 50 minutes before kickoff on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, guys, let's dive in now to what we saw this week in college football. Let's start with some of the latest news on the wire here as we get into some Senior Bowl acceptances. And we'll start with Georgia running back James Cook, a bunch of Bulldogs here being announced by the Senior Bowl Sunday night into Monday morning. Dane, let's go to you first here for James Cook, Dalvin Cook's younger brother.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the minority a little bit, but Cook's my top senior running back. I think he's exactly what a lot of NFL teams are looking for in today's NFL. He's got that lower body fluidity, the quick feet, the block recognition, so he can gash defenses on the ground. He doesn't have the best run power, but he's tough, and his feet are outstanding. But the thing that's really going to reel in teams is the pass catching skills. He can motion out. He can be a dynamic receiving threat. He's undersized. I'm not sure he's going to be north of 200 pounds, probably right around that 200-pound mark. But as a complementary back, he can be that Tony Pollard type of weapon. And we've seen what he's been doing in Dallas. Cook has that type of potential. He's a really good player who I think is overlooked in that Georgia backfield with Zamir White, and that other running back they have is underclassmen. So if given the chance to be, in that perfect complementary role, James Cook's going to be a good pro.
Yeah, and brother of Dalvin, he's got the same type of juice that Dalvin does, just in about a 20 to 25 pound lighter package. But he doesn't have a whole lot of tread on the tires, just under 700 career snaps at Georgia in his 4 or 5 years out there. And I just looked to all the other guys that kind of had a hybrid skill set that can really take advantage of the Mobile Senior Bowl platform, whether it was, Demetric Felton last year, that kind of hybrid receiver, running back, Antonio Gibson, Deebo Samuel, even go back 5 years, so like a Tyler Ervin. I think being able to just showcase your full skill set, like Dane had mentioned, his ability to contribute in the pass game. Let's see how much he can contribute in the pass game. He may be more of a through and through slot receiver at the next level than we think.
Yeah, and it's a guy that we talked about last week with Eric Galco here on the show. So I gave my thoughts there on James Cook. Let's now transition to a couple of offensive linemen for the Bulldogs. We'll start with Jamari Salyer, the left tackle, Ben, but a guy that has played up and down the offensive line over his career.
Yeah, he's a really experienced guy. He's got experience at guard. He's got experience at tackle. He's even played some center, some right guard, snaps at right tackle. I think he's checked off up and down the offensive line as far as experience. He was high school teammates with former offensive lineman Andrew Thomas out there. Really, really good size. I think he's going to slide inside at the next level, but I'm glad to see all these Georgia Bulldogs rolling in down there. Seems like they have a really good track record with Jim Nagy.
Yeah, that versatility is going to serve Salyer really well. And I don't know that you would say the same for Justin Schaefer, the left guard. I think he's only played that one spot along the O-line, but this guy just gets after people, has stood out the last couple of years while studying that offense, Dane. And I want to come to you, get your thoughts here on Justin Schaefer, the guard for the Bulldogs.
He's played a little right guard, but for the majority of his time at Georgia, he's been a left guard, 2-year starter, 6'4", 330. A much better run blocker than pass protector, which is something that I think really showed in the SEC title game against Alabama. If you watch that tape, I think it was kind of a microcosm of his overall body of work. The one-on-ones in Mobile are going to be really important for him to show that he can just hold up in space. We know he has the strength at the point of attack, but holding up in space, being able to match defensive linemen athletically, that'll be big during Senior Bowl practices.
Let's go over to the defensive side. Channing Tindall, the first senior linebacker to accept his invitation here to Mobile. Ben, thoughts on Channing Tindall? No Quay Walker yet, a guy that I think also deserving of an invite, but Channing Tindall heading to Mobile.
I bet there's a few Bulldogs that are sitting on their invites deciding if they want to accept yet as their team is competing in the playoffs. So those guys are typically late additions if they want to. But Channing Tindall, the Mike Will linebacker that's explosive, that's loose and long, with no career starts for that Georgia front seven. So he's a guy that just hasn't been able to leapfrog the starting lineup, but he does get in there quite a bit behind Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker and some of those other guys. The speed, the burst, the explosive movements, the blitzing ability, the read, react, start, stop, violently popping blocks, which, Fran, I just salivate over linebackers that can stack and shed and what I call fight for themselves. Really reminds me of like a Devondre Campbell. I'm excited that he's going to show up in Mobile.
He is souped up, man. He is violent. He is explosive. He is a fun watch. Really, that whole linebacking core, just a really fun study. Let's go down to the backside of this, the secondary cornerback, DK Kendrick, Dane, the lone member of that Georgia secondary to accept an invite to this point.
Yeah, and this is a huge get not for the Senior Bowl, but for Kendrick, because he's a first-round talent, but the off-field concerns, he was booted out of Clemson. He's got some troubles that he's going to have to answer for. It could be an anchor on his draft grade for some teams, but based on talent, Kendrick, he's up there with Roger McCreary, in my opinion, as fighting to be the top senior corner in this class. Sure. The interviews are going to be so important for Kendrick in Mobile. He's smart to go there. Obviously the combine, the pre-draft process, there will be other opportunities for him to interview. The more chances he has to get in front of NFL teams, convince them, hey, I'm still worth an early first-round pick. You won't have to worry about me off the field. You won't have to worry about me, making any noise away from the game. The more chances he has to do that, the better for him to convince teams, hey, I still belong. I'm top 50 talent, and I still belong to go, or I still should go with the top 50 picks.
This is purely speculation, but I would not be surprised to see him doing some return stuff out there and maybe even a couple receiver drills from time to time. Don't forget, former 5-star receiver, flip sides of the ball at Clemson. Not a guy that flipped, late in high school or as a recruit, flipped on kind of a pinch at Clemson and has never looked back. But he's a guy with all sorts of athleticism, a little raw at cornerback still. So we'll see what the NFL thinks of him.
I like that. That's a good point on your part. Let's now get into the weekend's action, and obviously the Bulldogs in action in this SEC title game. Guys, I watched a ton of football on Saturday. It was a great weekend, a great Saturday for Championship Saturday. And we'll start for me. My game ball, I'm going to go to that Georgia game. Georgia, Alabama, SEC title. I'm going to go to the other side. Sophomore quarterback Bryce Young. He blew me away, guys. I mean, not just with what he did as a thrower, with what he did as a runner, but his poise and just how calm and collected and even keeled this guy just seems to remain. Nothing rattles him. There was a play early in the game. It was the first half where he broke the pocket and started to scramble and then pitched it out to the flat, to the backfield, and just always aware for such a young player going up against this defense on this stage. I was blown away by Bryce Young. This guy is cool as a cucumber. We could talk about the physical traits, until the sun goes down. But this guy just really, really impressive with what we've seen from him in such a small sample size. I'm going to be honest. We were debating using for our On the Clock segment later in this episode who's going to win the Heisman. I said shut that down and said I think that's over. I think Bryce Young is the Heisman winner. I don't think that there's much discussion or debate needed after what he did on Saturday.
Yeah, he locked it up. I mean, for a sophomore, two areas that are just really remarkable: poise and processing.
No doubt.
Both those two areas for his meager experience. I mean, he's a first-year starter, and for him to go out there and play the way he has, especially in that title game against a Georgia defense that was being lauded as one of the best ever, so impressive. So yeah, it's I think if you want to work on your 2023 mock drafts, you might have your first two picks done already with Bryce Young and then Will Anderson. Alabama 1-2. Now maybe CJ Stroud maybe some other guys will have something to say about that, but you can't go wrong with those two players. I mean, they look like if they were in this draft class, I think the Lions and Texans and a couple other teams are looking at Bryce Young saying, why couldn't he be in this class? But those teams still might be picking at the top in 2023 when Young will be available.
And a little bit of a different recipe and formula. This wasn't a quarterback capitalizing off the run game and RPOs and things like we've seen Tua and Mac Jones the past couple of years. They had to almost abandon the run game, which the running backs were, 22 carries for a little over 70 yards, barely 3 a carry. I mean, there was a 3rd and 1 where he operated an empty. How many times in the Nick Saban era has Alabama Crimson Tide been 3rd and 1 and said, you know what, we got to go empty here. We got to spread them out. That Georgia front seven makes you do some things differently. And Bryce Young capitalized when they had to ebb and flow to the pass game. And Fran, my game ball on the other end, a lot of those passes from Bryce Young. Jamison Williams, the speed, the double moves, the crossing routes, his yards after catch, the route running nuance on that double move. He's not just fast, knowing how to use your speed, but nuanced ability and throttling down your paces, your strides, knowing when to burst, checking a lot of boxes in the pass game. And having another great play on special teams as a punt gunner.
Awesome. Yep.
I mean, I absolutely salivate over the top players at these programs playing special teams. We saw it last year with Patrick Surtain, our own Devonta Smith in big time games. Same thing with Alabama this year. The top players play special teams, and it was just great to watch them. All those abilities that receiver play, releases, straight line speed, stacking that defender. It's up in punt gunning. This is a guy that's going to be running down on punt in the NFL. He's a really impressive player.
Yeah, and what he did, I mean, we saw that long catch and run on the intermediate route. I feel like we've seen that play 8-9 times this year where he catches a ball at 12, 15 yards and takes it 65 or 80 to the house. Jamison Williams, just a special talent. Dane, who gets your game ball here this week?
You guys went with two Alabama players. I'm going to go with a former Alabama player. When you think of that Cincinnati offense, I think obviously you think Desmond Ridder, but running back Jerome Ford, he's been a key cog in that offensive attack as well for the Bearcats. Against Houston in the AAC championship game over the weekend, he averaged 10.4 yards per carry, 187 rushing yards on 18 carries, 2 touchdowns. This is a former 4-star recruit out of the Tampa area. He spent 2 years in Tuscaloosa and before he transferred to Cincinnati, and he's really ignited his draft stock this year. If he comes out, I think he's going to have a chance to be one of the first 10 running backs drafted, and it's going to be fun to see him in the college football semis against his old team, Alabama. And something else to keep in mind, he is all-star eligible. So if he does declare, I can promise you he will receive that Senior Bowl invite. It could be another opportunity for him to move his name up in the running back rankings.
Interesting. That's a good nugget there on Jerome Ford, a guy who broke off a couple of huge runs there for the Bearcats in that win. Let's now go to our one-play takeaways, guys. And I'll tell you what, one play that stands out to me from this weekend, Kenny Pickett, that long touchdown run, obviously very divisive play. I think defensive-minded fans and coaches and players are looking at that and saying, calling BS on that one. But I think looking at just what he did from not just from an athletic standpoint, but just a savvy play. And I look at Kenny Pickett. He fakes the slide. What was he, 25, 30 yards downfield, and then gets the defender to break down and then takes off towards the right sideline for the touchdown. Kenny Pickett, that play, for whatever reason you want, that's going to stick with me here from this past weekend in college football, Dane.
Well, and give me a break with all the outrage. Like, exploit the rule. It's receivers, a little bit of push off, offensive tackles, a little bit of holding. I mean, it's part of the game in the margins. And if it's not a rule, if you can get away with it, it's smart to take advantage of it. And, if they want to change a rule and say as soon as the quarterback starts to give himself up a little bit, that's when you have to call the play dead, I'm fine with that. But I'm not going to count it against Kenny Pickett for taking advantage. And not only the decision to do that, it takes a pretty impressive athlete to kind of throttle down a little bit, make that slide motion, and then pop right back up without losing any momentum. So not just the decision, but the athleticism to pull that off, pretty impressive. My
knee was sore the next morning just looking at the replay of that play from the high end zone camera. Just a ridiculous play. And to your point, don't hate the player, hate the game. If you don't like the rule, you don't like the rule. But don't kill Kenny Pickett on that one. Ben, give us your one play takeaway here.
Well, we've been talking about Devin Lloyd ad nauseum every week. LB1, lock it, book it, chisel it in stone. He's the best linebacker in the class. Beautiful interception return for a touchdown in the first quarter of the Pac-12 championship game. Great break on the ball. Read the quarterback, the little ball route to the spot. So I think it was a tight end or somebody run a little spot route over the ball. Same old with Devin Lloyd. It's getting a little boring at this point. But a guy that kind of reminds me to a T, I just said last week, Fred Warner, and all these plays showing up in the pass game are just kind of connecting those dots. 6'3", 235 or so, high cut, ball skills, 3-down player. Devin Lloyd again.
There you go. I like it. Dane, how about your one play takeaway here?
So I went with another Utah player. I went Dalton Kincaid, tight end. Utah really did a nice job implementing their tight ends to move the football against Oregon. And Kincaid, I don't think he receives nearly enough attention as a prospect. He had a 30-yard catch over the middle of the field in the second quarter where he took a lick over the middle of the field, but he held on, big first down. 2 plays later, Kincaid scores the touchdown. Is a really impressive few play stretch for the tight end who I have ranked pretty high, considering I don't hear any buzz on this player, at least in the media sphere. With NFL teams, I hear plenty of buzz. But he is a guy that I think is well-liked, a lot more well-liked than I think people realize, considering the lack of buzz out there.
Yeah, he's a player that, is really kind of flying under the radar. And obviously, you've got Brant Keith there at tight end. So not a guy that is getting a ton of reps. So I'm glad that you brought up Kincaid and what he's done so far for the Utes. Let's now go to some down the road guys, our down the road freak shows here. And I'm going to start with Alabama pass rusher Dallas Turner. Had a sack very early in this game against Georgia. He's now got 5.5 sacks in his last 5 games. So you talk about former 5-star recruit, as you would expect with Alabama. Dallas Turner, true freshman. I would expect we're going to be hearing plenty about this kid down the road, and he's really caught fire here down the stretch for the Tide. Ben, let me come to you first here. You're down the road guy for this week.
Well, a guy we've talked about in the past, but I don't think we've talked about this year for his sophomore campaign. That's linebacker Noah Sewell over there for the Oregon Ducks. Played his brother, I'm blanking on his name, linebacker for Utah over the weekend. These guys are the younger brothers of Penei Sewell, now the left tackle for the Detroit Lions. He just had a huge game in that Pac-12 championship against Utah. Interception, forced fumble, 9 tackles, bunch of big run stuffs. He's a hulking linebacker that just makes ball carriers go backwards when they touch him. So Noah Sewell will be a true junior next year. He'll be eligible for 2023. File it away. We'll study him in the summer.
This 2023 class just continues to add names that gets a lot of people excited. Sewell definitely near the top of that list. Dane, who's your name for us this week?
Well, this is for the 2024 class. Okay. I'm talking about freshman Brock Bowers. And we've talked about him before. Big tight end for Georgia. Against Alabama, 10 for 139 and a touchdown. This guy's a receiving threat is so impressive. Yep. Not the biggest target, but his athleticism, his pass-catching traits are so impressive, especially considering he's 18 years old. To me, Bowers is one of those 1%ers. The guys that could be playing in the NFL this year because they have the traits to do so, the toughness to do so. Georgia did not have a ton to be excited about on offense in that SEC title game. Brock Bowers was one reason to be kind of excited about what this offense can be.
Yeah, he's, anytime you're given a tight end jet sweeps, you know that he's got some juice. And that's something that Bowers has done a couple times here this season for the Bulldogs. Let's now get to the film room recap. A guy that we've studied over the last week or so that has caught our eye. Guys, I continue to kind of churn through some of these all-star game announcements. And one guy that I had not studied yet, but I'd gotten a little bit of a heads up on a few weeks back from somebody that had seen him. And that's Montana State linebacker Troy Anderson. And he confirmed he is heading to the Shrine Bowl in Las Vegas. And getting a little bit of a look here at Anderson over the weekend. This guy is athletic. I mean, he's 6'4". He's like 230 pounds. He's a good-looking kid with really light feet, fluid hips. He's got a short area burst. He can close. He's got range. He's a converted running back and option quarterback. That's how he started. He was like the all Big Sky freshman of the year when he first got there on the offensive side of the ball. Led the team in passes. Had like 10 touchdowns rushing as a sophomore. Then made the move over to defense. Now, his eyes are not where they need to be often. He gets held up by play action, any kind of misdirection. He could be slow to react to things. So he's still coming along from the mental side. But you're talking about a guy with size and with athleticism. He is more than willing to come downhill and do some of the dirty work at the point of attack. He needs to get better there, but he's willing. He's a fun player, a really interesting study. He just needs to come along. This is definitely more prospect than player right now. But I think the tools are there to be something really interesting. But Troy Anderson, a really interesting watch there, Ben. Who would be your film or recap for this week?
Well, I wanted to dive into Tennessee receiver Velus Jones Jr., who is a USC transfer. He's heading down to the Mobile for the Senior Bowl. And he just has a really interesting college career. Probably didn't go to plan as he had hoped. He was a 5-star that everybody wanted, went to USC, and just never really produced early in his career at USC. For a variety of reasons. Early on was stacked behind the deep receiving room. Then 2019 had a hamstring injury, not to mention a variety of quarterbacks in that lineup with young JT Daniels and Slovis coming on and Matt Fink. But he is an exciting playmaker. And this year at the Tennessee Vols, finally got to show off a little of that after being pretty quiet last year since coming over. But he's 6 feet, 200 pounds. This is a 10.5, 600-meter kid. So this is a guy with a lot of explosive long speed, which you could see in his returning ability. Has a couple big plays in special teams, over 500 special team snaps in his career. But he's a slot receiver with good size, excellent hands, yards after catch ability, really competitive blocker, whether it's on some perimeter stock blocks or even watch a kickoff return I had tweeted out where another returner took the kickoff from him. He just led blocked and blasted 2 players right to the ground. He's a really tough player. Not a whole lot of production in his career, though. Has eclipsed 100 catches in his career for just over 1,300 yards. That isn't really the totals we'd like for elite receivers going in the NFL. But I think his best football is ahead of him. He's got good size, good speed, special teams ability. He catches everything. I think he has 8 drops in his career on 150 targets. So a reliable player with good size. I want to see what he can do down in Mobile.
Yeah, and you posted some of the clips with him blocking as well. So willing to do some of that dirty work and the special teams prowess, all that. Really important for his value moving into the NFL. Dane, take us home. Who's your film and recap this week?
So I finished my report on Cincinnati receiver Alec Pierce, and my top 15 positional rankings are going up this week on The Athletic. And Pierce is among my top 10 receivers in this class. I think he's that type of talent. He's physical with football. I love his height and focus. It doesn't matter if he's wide open or he's triple covered. It's the same height and focus every single rep. He doesn't have maybe the dynamic separation ability. He's still learning how to separate. He has quick feet and he has some of that short area quickness. He's still learning how to separate, but he's long, limber, love the ball skills. He can consistently win when the ball's in the air. Still adding some branches to his route tree. but he is a true pass catching weapon who is at his best vertically, use that springy athleticism. We've touched on him before, former track star, volleyball star in high school, kind of a late bloomer with the way he's come out, grown and really broken out for the Cincinnati Bearcats offense. But the ball tracking skills, that's what really separates him. And that's what will translate, I think, to the NFL in a big way.
Yeah, we talked about Pierce last week, a guy that can be a 3-level threat in the NFL. Well, guys, we've talked about a bunch of players, but as always, we're going to talk about 3 more. We've got our On the Clock segment here with Chris McPherson, a critical week here. All of us tied up. All of us have 4 wins so far in the season. We'll see who could break the tie here in On the Clock.
On the Clock.
All right, time to welcome in Chris McPherson here as we go on the clock. And C-Mac, set the table for us. What do we got here?
So congratulations to you guys. The regular season is in the books. And since we're looking ahead to the draft, we want to know which player, draft-eligible player, has helped his stock the most during the regular season. And if you don't agree with my decision, for those of you listening, make sure to leave a comment wherever you listen to the podcast. So I believe, Ben, you had first dibs last week. So Fran, you have the honors of kicking things off here this week. Who is your draft-eligible prospect who has helped his stock the most in the regular season?
So this one was an interesting topic, and it's one where I kind of went back and forth. Do I go with a guy that kind of pushed himself into the top 5, into the top 8, top 10, or do we go with a guy that kind of came out of nowhere and now is squarely in that first round discussion? And I went with the latter, mainly because, look, we talked about the quarterback landscape all offseason, all summer leading in. And what was the big question we all talked about, the big topic we talked about numerous times here on the show? Who was going to be that quarterback this year that came from relative anonymity and got himself into the first round discussion? Now, over the years, we've seen the Zach Wilsons and Joe Burrows and Carson Wentz's of the world all make that jump, and they've all gone in the top 5, top 10. I don't know that Kenny Pickett from Pitt is going to end up in that discussion, but if you find, C-Mac, anyone who says that they had a mock draft from before October that had Kenny Pickett in the first round, I will show you a stone cold liar, because there is no way anybody had him in that discussion coming into the season. What Kenny Pickett has done this year, leading Pitt, not only with what he's done on the field, but leading them to an ACC title, and now very likely going to be in that first round, potentially the first quarterback off the board, as Dane had him in his most recent mock, I believe. I think when you have that discussion, no one was saying that about Kenny Pickett 3-4 months ago. And I think that that's a credit to him. It's a credit to that Pitt staff, everything that they've done to get him to this point. You're getting comparisons to Joe Burrow, the former number 1 overall pick. I think when you look at Pickett, the way that he's executing, how calm and poised he is in the pocket. We saw that in this ACC title game. I talked about that big play earlier with what he did with his legs. But I think when you look at Kenny Pickett, he's executing as well as anybody at the quarterback position this fall. And anytime we know that quarterbacks are always going to get pushed off the board. This is a guy that was a day 3 talent, had that ability to maybe be the 5th or 6th quarterback at the Senior Bowl last year. Decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to see if I can push my stock even more. Goes back, and now he's in round 1 discussion. I don't think anybody's helped their stock more than Kenny Pickett.
Dane, are you upset that Fran doesn't have your mock draft committed to memory?
Well, I know he does. He just doesn't want to admit it. So
I may have skimmed over it. I may have looked at it.
Yeah. Now, Fran, going back to Kenny Pickett here for a second, why do you think it took until this year for him to have this meteoric rise, that Joe Burrow-esque rise into potentially becoming a first-round pick, potentially the first quarterback off the board?
That's a good question. And I think Ben has pointed to the fact that he was amongst, and Ben, I might need to lean on you for this stat. I believe he was amongst the highest quarterbacks in college football in terms of drop percentage by his receivers and his pass targets. His supporting cast did not do him many favors leading up to this year. They've got some young guys like Addison that are really coming through. Lucas Kroll at tight end have really come through for him this year. Some of the other freshman receivers are really stepping into big roles. So I think when you look at some of the talent on the back end, that has come through for him. But also, just to give a little bit of credit to Kenny Pickett as well, he has also, stepped up his game. He was not playing to quite this high level earlier in his career, Ben.
And you are correct, Fran. Not just near the top in drop percentage and drops from his receivers, he was the top. So his career at Pitt, the last 3 years, excluding 2021, the leader in college football in drop passes. And it was always an interesting kind of case study to see Trevor Lawrence in the same ACC conference throw into these big gazelle Spider-Man receivers with these huge catch radius, and Kenny Pickett can't get any help on the other side. And there might be one guy out there with maybe a first-round mock on him. His old QB coach, Tony Rasiopi, has been just banging the table for this kid every summer, putting up all sorts of drills and clinic work tape with the kid going back to high school. So his old QB coach might have had faith in him.
That's fair. Well, in terms of a mock draft, well, I don't know that Tony's in the mock draft business at this point.
I thought everyone's in the mock draft business. Speaking of mock drafts, Dane, I know you did a big piece on Kenny Pickett. I don't know if you're disappointed that you don't get to pick him here in the spot, but who is your selection as the draft eligible prospect who has helped his stock the most during the regular season?
So this is a really interesting question because the word most is very broad. And I think who helped their stock the most? If you're talking about just draft picks, I think the answer is Kenny Pickett. But, he's gone from, say, a mid-fourth to a mid-first, conservatively speaking. However, I think the answer to this question is Michigan stud pass rusher Aiden Hutchinson, who has gone from a mid-first round pick to possibly the number one overall pick, which is what I had in my mock draft last week. And I know what you're thinking. There's a bigger gap between mid-fourth to mid-first in terms of total draft picks. But let's talk about that rookie contract. Do you know what the difference is in money-wise between the mid-fourth and the mid-first? It's about $10 million. That's a nice jump for Kenny Pickett. He made $10 million this past year. But the difference between being a mid-first round pick and a number one overall pick, $22 million. That's more than double the difference. So and let's just say, even if Hutchinson doesn't go number one, let's say he goes number 5, which I think, I don't see him going lower than that. That's still a difference of $16.5 million between pick 5 and pick 16, right in the middle of the first round. So that's still a bigger jump than Pickett in terms of value of the rookie contract. Not to mention, Hutchinson's a defensive lineman. Defensive linemen drafted mid-first round don't exactly receive a ton of attention. Defensive linemen drafted top 5, maybe number 1. That's more endorsements, more earning opportunities away from football. So who helped their stock the most? I just laid out the dollars and cents. To me, Pickett has made more of a jump in terms of draft picks because he had more ground to make up. But Hutchinson's ascending play as a senior this year put significantly more money in his pocket, probably over $20 million, possibly over $20 million. No other player in this class can say that.
Dane, what do you think going to the Big Ten championship and the performance previously against Ohio State? What do you think those performances alone have done to his stock? The fact that the scouts, knowing that he's going to be profiled in these big time games, that he's shined the brightest.
Yeah, he's the guy that came back for that Ohio State game. He had an injury last year, and there were other factors, but he has talked about since the summer, Ohio's beating Ohio State, going out the right way. That was number 1 on his priority list, and he did not let the moment pass him up. 15 pressures against the Buckeyes, and then watching him against Iowa couldn't block him. It was fantastic. He has really helped himself in terms of moving himself from, a guy that's pretty good to a guy that, okay, why isn't he number 1? Why, what can we point to that, to take away from his ability to go at the top of the draft, be at the top of our draft board? So showing up all season, that's great, but showing up against Ohio State, in the Big Ten championship game, and I'm very excited to see him against Georgia in the college football playoff, going up against that offensive line, that offense. That should be a lot of fun.
I feel like we have a domino effect going here, where Dane put everyone out there on the Athletic to Kenny Pickett to an extent, and Fran takes him number 1. And if I recall correctly, I think Ben had Aiden Hutchinson as one of our on-the-clock nominees earlier this season. I know he's probably been a couple, but I feel like he might have been the first one to include him. I'm sure there are listeners who will tell me that I'm wrong. But, maybe Ben's disappointed he couldn't go for Aiden Hutchinson. So, you got the last of the litter here, Ben. Who are you going to make the case for? Which we've
been talking Pickett for years and talking Aiden Hutchinson all summer here in order to properly assess who's improved their stock. So we're talking about the difference in stock from the before the season to right now. It has to be a prospect that's essentially a one-year wonder that's come out of nowhere. Their stock had to have been in the basement for a variety of reasons. And while Aiden Hutchinson is going to be a top 5 pick, might be the first overall pick, like Dane Brugler mocked him last week, he isn't even the most improved on his own defensive line. I mean, you got to go over to David Ajabo, who was probably a priority free agent coming into the year. And now he's looking like a top 50, maybe a first round pick. You want to talk dollars and cents. Give me some priority free agent numbers to first round differences. Now we're talking dollars and cents, but I'm actually going to scrap that and go with another 1 year wonder in Alabama receiver Jameson Williams, who had 25 snaps played coming into the season on offense. Why? Because he was an Ohio State transfer, didn't get on the field, had 15 catches for the Ohio State Buckeyes in his 2 years. CMAC goes over to Alabama, and I don't think I need to give you a whole lot of education on who Jameson Williams is now, but that's the point. He's come out of nowhere. He was a 5-star hot, recruit everybody wanted. He's finally able to show that now for the University of Alabama, and he has shown it emphatically. Week in, week out, explosive, big plays all over the place, hands, route running, speed, over the top, double moves. Look back Saturday against his performance against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game. Where was his draft stock before the season? I mean, Dane, who we love and trust, put out a top 10 receiver list. Nowhere to be found on that one in the summer. So I know his stock was kind of in the basement for a variety of reasons. Now a mid first round pick, maybe even a higher than that. Pretty good improvement on his stock there.
So giving me a lot to think about. Going back to Pickett, it's always interesting. I wonder, is it better to be the overhyped quarterback going into the season and to have to live up to those lofty expectations, or to be able to come from a little bit under the radar like Pickett has? Dane, I love the argument with Hutchinson being, pretty much a mid-first round guy who possibly could be the number 1 overall pick, and Ben going with a guy who's completely off the board. So I think you guys have taken this argument into 3 different directions. You got to figure out which one is going to pull me in the most. And I'm going to give the win to Dane this week because I know that we've talked a lot about Hutchinson and where he's got, but the fact that he's now in that conversation to be the top overall pick. I mean, it seemed like Kayvon Thibodeau was like clearly going to be the top defensive lineman, and now all of a sudden, Aiden Hutchinson could be that guy. It seemed like it was a pretty strong lock. So great arguments all the way around. I didn't want to just make this the quarterback award, the ascending quarterback award, so to speak, for Fran. And, Ben makes a very valid argument. And when Jameson Williams goes top 10, top 15, he can come back and laugh at me. So there you have it, folks.
$22 million. That's the difference between pick 16 and pick number 1. That's a huge, when you talk about improvement, it's great to be able to say you're the number 1 pick. Financially speaking, $22 million is a lot of money, and that's a big deal for Aiden Hutchinson if he's able to pull that out and be the number 1 pick.
And I do feel for Dane in this scenario too. He's he's up all night with twins. He's a little bit groggy, and his vision must be going because when I sent out the question that it's going to be who helped their stock, he read it as who earned the most money. And CMAC followed through with that. But we'll let that go.
He went with he leaned into the argument and went full bore with it. So.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Money, it's a part of the draft. Why guys go back to school or maybe come out, and I mean that's a part of it. So that should be part of the conversation.
Hey, pumping out multiple kids. I just watched King Richard. I think everybody's taking things a little too far right now with trying to monetize that next generation. But bringing it to dollars and cents is always important.
Hey, my 4-year-old daughter's getting a tennis racket for Christmas, so it's. After I watch King Richard, Will Smith's going to win the Academy Award. I mean, it's not a bad movie, but yeah, I'm going to get my kids started on tennis pretty early.
She's already 4. She's behind.
Yeah, seriously.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Great stuff there from Chris McPherson, breaking the tie between myself, Ben Fennell, and Dane Brugler. Let's now transition to our draft mailbag, where we have a couple of questions to get to. Number 1, we're going to start off with a comment from Dennis Powers, who left a 5-star review saying, excellent and informative podcast for any Eagles fan, especially those like my wife and I who live in enemy territory out in Mesquite, Texas. Thank you so much. So, Dennis, really appreciate the shout out. Hope you guys tune into the show as often as possible. And thanks so much for being a fan from afar. Really appreciate you leaving that 5-star review for us. And then also, Maddie Nice left a 5-star review saying, Fran, which All-Star games will you be attending this year? And obviously, Maddie, good question. It's always going to be dependent on the Eagles playoff run. If the Eagles are in the playoffs, I won't be going to any of these All-Star games. If the Eagles are playing, that's my priority. But if the season is over by that point, my plan is that I will spend a few days in Las Vegas for the East-West Shrine Bowl and then go right from there down to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. going to see plenty of great prospects from all across the country at those two games, the two games by far that set themselves above from the rest of the pack. And so I'm excited to attend both events this year. Obviously, the first year in Las Vegas for the Shrine Bowl, and then I love going down to Mobile every single year. It's one of my favorite trips, one of my favorite things to do. Really missed doing it last year, obviously due to the pandemic. Really hoping I can make that trip this January. That said, great stuff from Maddie Nice, from Dennis Powers, and thanks to all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here with Eagles Entertainment. We'll be back later this week getting you ready for some bowl season. I'm hoping we're going to have a great guest. It's not official yet. I don't want to jinx it, so we're going to have some great guests later this week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. When the clock hits all zeros, the game might be over, but the action is not. Join us for the post-game show presented by Rico for instant reaction. Watch live as Coach Nick Sirianni and Eagles players come to the podium and meet with the media. We will make sure you do not miss a word. Myself, Ike Reese, and Gabriella DiGiovanni will also break down the game live at the desk and hear from Eagles insider Dave Spadaro to get his thoughts. The post-game show presented by Rico can be seen on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.